Good evening, everyone. 안녕하십니까. Welcome to the special webinar, K-Move, Developing Your Career with Mentorship, co-hosted by the Korea Society and KOTRA, the Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency. My name is Tom Byrne, and I'm the President and CEO of the Korea Society. The Korea Society is a private, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated solely to the promotion of awareness, understanding, and cooperation between the people of Korea and America. Since March, the Korea Society has stepped up its activities for an online audience, although we are looking forward to when we can resume normal activity in our attractive office at 350 Madison Avenue in Midtown Manhattan. Today, we are excited to present our second informative webinar in a series of 3 programs in partnership with KOTRA. For those of you who are interested in the first program held back in July, Building Your Brand on YouTube, please check out our YouTube content at koreasociety.org. Today, we have invited an experienced group of mentors who have successfully built their professions in the United States. They will provide valuable information and advice on the employment process, strategies, and how they settled into the U.S. market. Tonight's program will be composed of 2 parts. First, Soon-Kyu Shin will share his story about his professional successes at Brown Brothers Harriman, BBH, and as a writer, overcoming the challenges of being blind. This will be followed by a panel discussion with 2 successful Korean-American mentors, Esther Ahn, Head of User Experience for YouTube TV, and Ye Jin Kim, Senior Vice President, Global Creative at IT Cosmetics. The discussion will be moderated by William Juhn, attorney at Eisenberg and Baum's Law Center for Deaf and Hard of Hearing. Before we get started, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to KOTRA, our partner in putting together this program. I hope all of you enjoyed tonight's program. Now I would like to turn the screen over to Mr. Lee Ji-hyung, President of KOTRA North America. President Lee will speak for the organization following my remarks.
Good evening. I'd like to welcome and thank you all for attending this event. My name is Ji-hyung Lee, President of KOTRA North America Head Office. KOTRA is a South Korean government agency serving small to medium-sized businesses and startups looking to tap into the global market. We strive to promote international trade and investment in 84 countries. I'm in charge of KOTRA's 9 North American offices, with our headquarters situated here in New York. KOTRA New York K-Move Center provides institutional support for both companies looking for young professionals and qualified Korean job seekers through annual job fairs, workshops, and webinar events. The recent pandemic, with its enormous impact on the global economy, has resulted in a desperate situation for the U.S. job market. More discouraged workers are now generated, including Korean students, in despair, intensifying hardships on recruiting companies. KOTRA and the Korea Society has put together today's webinar to provide measures on how to overcome these challenges in this unprecedented time. The group of professional mentors invited will share the wisdom they have learned through experience with practical advice for you all. We certainly hope today's program encouraged us to overcome the hard times and inspire current job seekers to successfully build their careers in desiring fields. KOTRA would like to thank our distinguished speakers in sharing their insights with us today. We would also like to express our deep appreciation to the Korea Society in collaborating with us again after our previous event in June. I now turn it over to William Juhn, the moderator for today's webinar. Mr. Juhn is an attorney at Eisenberg and Baum's Law Center for the Deaf and Hard of Hearing. He represents clients in anti-discrimination cases. Previously, he also worked for Minkwon Center, a nonprofit organization serving low-income immigrants, and Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. Please welcome William, and once again, Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoy the program.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to tonight's webinar. My name is William Juhn. I'll be moderating the session 1 and 2 of today's webinar. It's a great pleasure to participate in this program hosted by the Koreasosa이어티 and KOTRA. Thank you for the opportunity. And thank you, everyone, for joining today's webinar. The session 1 will be the keynote speaking. Session 1 will be the keynote speaker with keynote speaker Seung-Gyu Shin. Mr. Shin is a fixed income research analyst for Brown Brothers Harriman, where he is responsible for evaluating investment opportunities in the healthcare and consumer products sectors. Mr. Shin's professional investing career began in 1994 as an analyst for JP Morgan. Mr. Shin received his AB degree from Harvard and was a PhD candidate at MIT. Mr. Shin also serves as the board chair of YANA, You're Not Alone Ministry, a nonprofit organization committed to helping orphaned and abandoned children. He also published the book, Things You See with Your Eyes Closed, a blind Wall Street analyst's stories of everyday miracles. So without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Shin for his keynote speech. Mr. Shin.
Thank you, William. I'm so honored to be here with you all, albeit virtually. My purpose this evening, I'm told, is to give job seekers encouragement and hope. I assure you that hope is very much alive, to be sure, much more alive and resilient than the coronavirus. I have limited control for avoiding the viral infection, but I know that I can choose to get infected with the strongest strain of hope. Today, I'd like to share with you how I got this most severe case of hope-itis. The phrase stumbling blocks has to be more poignant and relevant to blind people than most others. Even before my 백일 party, 백일잔치, you know, that party that people have in Korea for their baby who turned 100 days old. Before that party, for me, doctors diagnosed the still incurable disease of glaucoma in both of my eyes. Instead of family, friends, and neighbors, there were nurses at my 백일 party as I was hospitalized for my first eye surgery. My mother stopped counting the number of surgeries I had at number 22. It took 8 long years and enough money to buy a house a year for the doctors to conclude that my eyesight could not be saved after all. And so I lost all visual acuity, even the light perception, at the age of 9. This was no stumbling block. It was more like a huge boulder, which could have been an insurmountable barrier for my life. But that was a mere prologue for my life. The main story was just beginning. Being defeated once in the battle of saving their son's eyesight, my parents, especially my mother, soon entered another battlefield, that of educating and training me so that I would be prepared to face the world as a functioning adult. She enrolled me in a school for the blind in Seoul, and after asking around, decided that the most respectable career I could have was that of a music teacher at a school for the blind. She ignored the obvious fact that I was tone deaf and had no musical talent whatsoever. But you know those Korean mothers. She insisted that I take piano lessons, learn Braille music, fully memorize every piece I played, and practice, practice, practice. Tiger moms existed even back then in the 1970s Korea. Something about 1% talent and 99% practice. I still think that she was wrong about my potential as a music teacher. But wouldn't you know it, that determination of hers to give me every chance for a full, fulfilling life eventually brought me an opportunity of a lifetime, something neither she nor I could have imagined. In the summer of 1980, I went to summer camp sponsored by the United World Mission in Korea. Once, to impress the new friends I had made at camp, I began to play the piano. I still remember it. It was Schubert Impromptu number 90-2, a fast-paced piece that sounds great, even if you make lots of mistakes along the way. While I was playing the piano, a gentleman who spoke English came over and asked for my name and where I went to school. One of the boys there translated for me and told me that the gentleman was an important missionary. He said, now that the missionary knew who I was, something good may happen to me. It was an understatement of the century. As the fall school term began, I learned that the Reverend Barry Flitcroft, the director of the United World Mission, was organizing a quartet of blind students to take to the United States for a fundraising tour. He insisted that I go along as the accompanist. The arguments against this idea, that I was too young and that there were many other much more talented piano players at the school, did not persuade him. So in January of 1981, I went on my first trip to the United States with the quartet. During that tour, we visited the Overbrook School for the Blind in Philadelphia. When the director of that school heard me play the piano, again, the same impromptu, he decided that I should be given a chance to come to his school. So this way, through the piano lessons I was forced to take, the practices which were forced on me, I got a chance to come to the United States as an international student, which I did when I was 15 years old. From then on, one amazing thing followed another. I got to attend a regular public high school. I dared to apply to some top universities and got to study at Harvard College and MIT. In a curious chain of events, I wound up in a finance career working on Wall Street. And the most amazing of all, I even got married, and my wife Grace and I have two children, a 19-year-old daughter, Ye Jin, and a 15-year-old son, David Patrick. In short, I got to live a life beyond my wildest dreams. Well then, how has the walk been? It has been over 38 years since I came to America. I told you the high points so far, the education, the career, and the family. But how has the walk, specifically the career walk, been? Well, I had many dreams. Arriving in Cambridge, Massachusetts as a college freshman, I was full of confidence. I vowed to take the advanced courses quickly, graduate in 3 years, and someday win the Nobel Prize. In what? Doesn't matter, in something. I proudly told a fellow freshman that I had taken calculus in 12th grade. He said, "Oh, calculus. I studied that when I was 11. He didn't mean 11th grade, he meant age 11. I knew that I was in trouble. From the little league to the major league, perhaps, a frog finally out of the deep well. So I decided to dial back on my dream. Like many other Korean students, I decided to go for pre-med. You see, I had heard about a totally blind person who had attended Temple University Medical School and become a successful psychiatrist. How cool would it be to become a doctor? Despite my blindness, I dreamed of wearing a white coat and being highly respected for my accomplishments. Well, that went out the window too. When I was a junior in college, I learned about the technical guidelines which the American Medical Association had adopted. Among other things, the guidelines required that a doctor must be able to examine a patient without assistance. In short, it was saying that a blind person who cannot see a patient's physical condition, such as his pallor, cannot become a doctor. I was very discouraged. Pre-med at Harvard was no cakewalk. I had taken all those competitive science classes. For a while, I became depressed and lost motivation and direction. After a while, though, I had to acknowledge to myself that a medical career was an aspiration that had in part come from my ambitious nature, to show the world what I could do even though I was blind. It was a lot more about my ego than a desire to help, heal, or cure. By this time, I was a college senior, and the future was appearing a lot faster than I liked. So I resolved to be more realistic and quit insisting on dreams or aspirations that had long odds of success. So I decided, what else? To go to grad school. I figured that I could have an academic career instead. After all, there were more blind professors than blind doctors or Nobel Prize winners. I had taken an undergrad course called Psychology Applied to Business. I liked that course. What's more, I liked the professor who taught it because he took a particular interest in my undergrad career. So I went to MIT Sloan School for a PhD in organization studies. Alas, academic career was not in the cards for me either, apparently. In the early 1990s, the Americans with Disabilities Act, ADA, was giving employers, especially large employers, anxiety. One of the ADA mandates was that an employer could not discriminate based on disability in hiring, promoting, compensating, etc. The problem was that without regulations or case laws, nobody knew what the law really required them to do. I decided to focus my research on this. The question I wanted to answer was how a profession becomes more accessible to disabled people. As a case study, I selected an investment job and what else? Blindness. The goal was to find some blind investment professionals and find out from them how they got their jobs and how they were doing their jobs successfully. To my surprise, I could not find blind investment professionals, especially those who began from the bottom and worked their way up to, say, an analyst role on Wall Street. Well, one of the professors suggested that I research the question by doing. He had worked as a policeman for a number of years in LA because he wanted to study police culture. This is known as participative observation study. So I decided to do the same and applied for an investment job at Wall Street firms. I got an internship at JP Morgan in 1994. It was supposed to be for one summer. Then it became for 1 year. Finally, I decided to drop out of the PhD program, much to my parents' grief, as you can imagine. I have been working as an analyst ever since, for 26 years and counting. Looking back, the walk has been full of stumbling blocks. When I ran into one, I tried not to fall, first of all. Instead, I took bigger steps to get over it or go around it. If I fell, like that time I learned that I could not become a doctor, I changed my destination altogether instead of trying to climb over the huge rock that showed up in my way. All throughout this journey, I kept telling myself that there has to be a way, another way to get to where I need to go. That is what I call hope. And this hope has never disappointed me yet. I encourage you all to choose to be infected by hope, and may you never recover. Well, thank you for listening. I look forward to our conversation and talk about some questions that you might have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shin, for sharing your stories. As a disability rights lawyer myself, I was inspired to go to law school, back in college, when I took a course that was taught by a disability rights lawyer who was blind himself, and who later became a Supreme Court justice in Michigan. So, a lot of, things you have said, resonate with me, and I deal with ADA in my everyday practice. And, as we, defend, defend a lot of, represent a lot of, people with disabilities at my firm as well. So thank you very much for sharing your stories. I do have several follow-up questions for you today. So, you talked about, having a career path and, expect that it's, general smooth progression. And, even though we may assume speed bumps here and there, we hope for things to go smoothly most of the time. If you could tell us about a time when things did not go smoothly and, when you in fact ran into, huge speed bumps, I'd appreciate your answers.
Yeah, well, the biggest speed bump I can remember is getting fired. Excuse me. So I I began my career in 1994, as I said, at JP Morgan. And actually, I got married in 1996. And in 1998, in February, I found out that Morgan was about to implement a rather big layoff, and my name was on the list. It was a big bummer. I mean, here I am, married not even 2 years. We're hoping for a large family, children, all that. And all of a sudden, boom, no job. Well, what Morgan did for me actually is that they said, okay, you can stay until end of June, but you will not be doing your regular work. You will be looking for a job. So that was a really tough turn. I really didn't know what to do. What made things worse, of course, is that I was not even a US citizen at the time, did not even have a green card. So if I could not find an employer who would take over my green card application case, I would have to leave the country with my wife. So that was a big, big speed bump. But, my wife basically said, gee, those folks at Morgan made a mistake. I cannot believe they let you go. Such a talented person. She still thinks I'm very talented. Anyway, she encouraged me, and I decided that, I did it once, sending a lot of resumes to Wall Street firms to get a job. I can do it again. So I decided it was a numbers game. Anything that came close to what I was looking for, what my qualification might be, any close match, I basically sent them resumes, cover letters. Back then in 1998, it was actual pieces of paper you had to send by snail mail. So I figured if I send 100 resumes, I might hear from 10 employers. That might result in maybe 5 phone interviews that might lead to, say, 2 face-to-face interviews and so on and so forth. Well, what I did not realize is that, like I said, blind investment professionals were very rare back then. So the progression of job interviews would go smoothly until we were to meet face-to-face. And so I would warn them that I would be showing up with my seeing eye dog. And they would say, oop. It was amazing. When I talked about my seeing eye dog, 2 hours later, they would call and say, excuse me, we actually filled that position. You don't need to come in. So I used to joke, gee, if you have problems filling positions, just offer me a face-to-face and that will be solved. But I kept telling myself I had to be lucky only once. Just one out of all those folks I was talking to, I had to be lucky once. And interestingly enough, I got lucky twice. I got offers almost simultaneous from 2 different firms. And I chose to go to Brown Brothers Harriman, BBH, in 1998. And so my first day at BBH was June 29th, 1998. I got off payroll at JP Morgan on June 30. And wouldn't you know it, the lawyer who was handling immigration cases for Morgan was the same at BBH. So I didn't even have to find a new lawyer. It was such an amazing thing. And it was an incredible 3 months of effort for that. So that was the biggest speed bump I can remember, the biggest threat in my career, in my personal life. But it really was an amazing experience of trust from my wife and confidence in myself and saying I had to be lucky only once. And that's what really helped me on this everlasting journey of seeking for hope and finding it.
Thank you, Mr. Shin. I'm sure JP Morgan is still regretting their decision to fire you at the time, and looking back. So I do have other questions. So looking back in your 26-year career on Wall Street, what was the most challenging experience you would say, and how did you deal with it?
Yeah, career-wise, I think when you get hired into a firm like Brown Brothers, you're basically the big star in the beginning. They bring you on, looking at your qualifications, your educational pedigree, your experiences, and your personality, and so on and so forth. And all of a sudden, you are a regular employee. In 1990, there was a time when some of us remember it was the year of internet bubble. And I just wasn't in no way prepared for the huge market downturn that was coming. Actually, from 1990, when I joined BBH, I was doing equities. So it was such an exciting time, high-tech equity names. It was just, I was right there in the middle of the internet bubble. And I was, like I said, very surprised by the market downturn. So was a lot of people. We always talked about how the market just couldn't be sustained. But 2000, 2001, that time frame, things just went the wrong way. And it was like the biggest career slump ever, For the longest time, they were looking to me for decisions, for ideas, and following my ideas, buying stocks. I had delusions sometimes that my decision would move market, all that kind of stuff. And all of a sudden, come 2001, I had nothing to do in terms of hot ideas. People weren't paying attention to me anymore. What's more, on Wall Street, that our compensation has two components. You have salary, you have bonus. And bonus can be rather sizable portion of your compensation. And there was 1 year around that time that I got no bonus whatsoever. Money is one thing, but when a Wall Street firm doesn't give you a bonus, it says something. What they're saying is, we don't need you here. The idea of being valued very little, feeling that you're unwanted, it's very difficult to take day after day when you go into your office. So it was another time of self-reflection and deciding what I needed to do, where I want to go. I love the firm. I mean, I still do. I've been there for 22 years. I must love the place. I love the people. So I decided, instead of jumping ship again, I decided to persevere. That was a place I felt that year or two or three of this kind of thing, I'll get back on my feet professionally. And I just took it one day at a time, getting through each day, doing what needs to be done every day. Just say, this is what I need to get done today. And, we'll just look for the next year. There's got to be brighter days ahead. And, I don't exactly know when things began to brighten, but they did eventually. And, you know, I'm still there. I still enjoy the work. I still enjoy the people I work with. And, you know, Brown Brothers is an interesting place. It's still a privately held with very few number of partners owning the firm and running it. And, you know, we basically talk to partners all the time on a like first name basis. It's a wonderful place. And I'm glad that I endured those 2-3 years of major career slumps shortly after I was hired there.
Thank you. I'm sure BBH is very glad to have you there for the past 22 years. And, you know, you're working diligently for the firm and, you know, and as well. So, you know, since most, you know, many of our people, you know, watching this webinar are, you know, job seekers, you know, who are having a very, you know, I'm sure very difficult time, you know, especially in the pandemic. You know, I have a lot of friends, you know, who had to return to Korea, you know, because of visa issues and because, you know, they were laid off, you know, during this very difficult time. And, you know, I'm sure, you know, with your, you know, background and your time, you know, on Wall Street, I'm sure you have some valuable insights that you can, you know, share with, you know, job seekers out there. So, you know, if you had like 3 minutes, you know, with someone just starting in their career, you know, what advice or strategy would you give them?
Very good question. 3 minutes is good because one time I was asked this similar question, what 5 things can you think of? So I probably can't go that far. But the first thing that comes to mind is be flexible. Remember I told you that I got an internship in 1994 at JP Morgan? Well, I didn't mention that that was not for corporate finance role. That was actually for an HR role. Remember I told you that I was studying organization studies, like org behavior kind of discipline. The fact of the matter is that I made solid connections at JP Morgan in terms of interviews and so on, but there really wasn't any corporate finance group that was willing to take on a blind person. Morgan had never hired a blind person before in the, you know, what was that? Almost like 200-year history, and 150-year history maybe. And they said, well, that's got to be something he can do here. There's got to be something he can do here. So I said, well, you know, there's a lot of things I can do. It doesn't have to be balance sheets and income statements and so on. And they said, well, do you know SQL? And I said, yeah, I know SQL. SQL, by the way, is a database language that, you know, we use in business. I took a course, like 3 weeks of which was learning SQL. And I said, well, I can do SQL. They said, well, HR has a need of an SQL programmer who can help us with our information management system. I said, I can do that. The point I'm making here is that if you want to do something and that there's a goal, you want to, you know, be a data scientist, or you want to do corporate finance, you want to do, you know, graphics design, or whatever it might be. Sometimes taking a little side trip, if you value the firm that you want to go to, you can be willing to spend some time doing something else and transition into the role that you want to be. And so I actually did SQL programming for 3 months. And while I was doing that, I actually met people in corporate finance groups, global markets, sales and trading, and all that. You know, it was not a sort of a threatening kind of a situation, give me a job kind of a thing. It was as a colleague to a colleague, you know, good to meet you, you know, what do you do? I want to learn. And that just went for the whole summer. And by the end of the summer, I had an offer from one of the corporate finance groups. So being flexible, I think, especially in the beginning of your career, can be the thing that makes the difference for achieving your long-term goal. That's the first thing. Second thing is that integrity really is your best capital. You know, one of the things that I value highly is people who can admit their error. I still remember when I was doing corporate credit for Morgan, this was maybe 1997, that time frame. I had, you know, when you're, today you probably don't have to do this, but back then you had to actually copy all the financial data, statements data from your annual reports and prospectuses to your spreadsheet. So you have to actually by hand type the thing. So there was one time I actually made a mistake. Those of you who know corporate finance and balance sheet, what that looks like, I copied other liabilities into debt row. And as you can imagine, that actually screws things up. And I remember my boss saying, you know, these leverage numbers look funny. And I looked back and said, yeah, they do look funny. And I found out later that the error that I had made. And I said, you know what, I screwed up. I copied down the wrong row. And, you know, she was not happy. And I think that might have contributed to the fact that I got on that layoff list. So owning up to your mistakes might present challenges in your career path. But in the long run, it did me a world of good because people know when I say something that's based on, you know, an opinion that is based on the real data, opinions that really come from solid reasoning, because I still do that. I still say when I was wrong, I tell them I was wrong about something. And, you know, as your career progresses, it's not just a silly confusion on a row of data. It becomes actually a judgment call too. You know, there are times when I just wasn't thinking a question fully through and basically helped the firm lose money. But what's wonderful about investment business is that if you're right 6 out of 10 times, you know, that's great. 7 out of 10 times, you're basically a star. So we can afford to admit that when you were wrong, because when you do that, they don't question your judgment as often. So integrity is terribly important. The last thing I would say is that remember that the job is not all. Really, I mean, those of you who are starting in your career right now, you might think that I can say this because, you know, I've had 26 years of career under my belt. I have a family, I'm relatively stable, I can say that. But this is something I've actually believed from get-go. For me, family was more important. You know that big saying about nobody regrets having spent too much time in the office? I say, I want, when I'm dying, I want to say, gee, I should have spent a lot more time at the office, because it's the reverse, right? Because by saying that, I can assure myself that I was actually focused on more important things. So for me, more important, meaningful things in my life have been, as I say, my family. Also, the writing career I launched 5 years ago. I have a published book under my belt. It's an essay collection published in Korea. And I still write monthly columns for 매일경제, which is the Economy Daily. It's like the business newspaper, similar to the Wall Street Journal here. I write opinion column that has nothing to do with finance, has everything to do with how best to live our lives meaningfully. And finally, I am a founding member of this enterprise called Yana Ministry. We help abandoned children in Korea. You probably don't know this, but 1 out of 80 babies born in Korea is abandoned today. And these kids are not orphans, they're just abandoned. So they grow up in children's homes, what used to be called orphanages, and we help them. As a matter of fact, my daughter, Ye Jin, we brought her over from one of those orphanages and we raised her here. And Yana, one of the things that we do at Yana is that. And giving kids who had such a rotten lottery ticket of life to begin with, we want to reverse that. I always say that, you know, it's true that life is unfair, but I think what we really should look to do is to lessen the unfairness of life if we can. William, you are a lawyer. You defend clients who may be disabled, who might be facing challenges because of that. See, that's a meaningful job, meaningful work. So you actually can draw meaning from your work. Wall Street job has a lot of good things attached to that. But one thing that I don't think I can really claim with a straight face is that it's a meaningful work. So remember, the job is not all. There are a lot of other things that can make your life full and meaningful, and look for that, because that's what's going to sustain you a lot better in the long run than a career.
Thank you, Mr. Shin. Thank you for the great work that you do, you know, in your life. You know, I was really looking forward to meet you today because, you know, I've seen you on YouTube, you know, giving, you know, different speeches in Korea, and you're the star, right? So
I don't know about that.
you know, I was really looking forward to, you know, to meet you today and hear your stories. And you know, I really want to thank you for your work that you do as part of your ministry, and being an inspiring role model for, you know, many of people out there. So I, you know, really want to thank you again for joining us today and really sharing your stories. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, William. Thank you for listening. Look forward to meeting you someday.
Same here. Thank you. Now we're gonna turn over. So this is gonna, you know, be the end of session 1. For session 2, we're gonna have 2 panelists, Esther Ahn and Ye Jin Kim, join us and sharing some of their stories and some practical tips that they have for employment. So bear with us, we'll be back shortly.